and I'm not thrilled about the people representing us, even for a short period of time.
The election was 3.5 weeks away, not months, when he said that. And if the endless series of non sequiturs, outbursts, nonsensical answers wasn't strange enough, Donald Trump has become downright flaky as the presidential campaign gets down to the wire. From Politico, quote, "It's become something of a pattern. Trump is scheduled for an interview with a neutral media outlet. The date nears, and then things fall apart. It happened just this week to planned Trump sit-downs with NBC in Philadelphia and CNBC's Squawk Box. And that's on the heels of him backing out of a 60 Minutes episode earlier this month. According to Team Trump, their candidate is exhausted. More from Politico, quote, "The Trump campaign had been in conversations for weeks with the Shade Room about a sit-down interview. The site, which draws an audience that is largely young and black, hosted an interview with Harris just last week. In a conversation earlier this week, when describing why an interview had not come together just yet, a Trump advisor told the Shade Room producers that Trump was, quote, exhausted and refusing some interviews, but that could change at any time. But not too tired for his favorite network and his favorite morning show. Here he is on Fox and Friends, where he had to say stuff like this.
Well, Lincoln was probably a great president, although I've always said, why wasn't that settled? You know, I'm a guy that, it doesn't make sense. We had a civil war.
Well, half the country left before he got there.
Yeah. But you'd almost say, like, why wasn't that? As an example, Ukraine would have never happened in Russia if I were president.
The weave, you know. An exhausted Donald Trump also somehow found time for a podcast with Fox News star Dan Bongino where this happened.
I'm just a slight tad bit younger, but you remember 1980s Times Square pre-Giuliani?
Yeah.
You know, remember the Folexes, the fake Rolexes, and then all the peep shows and stuff? I mean, some of the scammers were good. Remember the shell game guys?
That's
like,
right.
they were good. Like, so that's them. Like, if you're going to be good at a scammer, you might as well be good at it. That's what 60
The press
Minutes
is a big scam.
Oh,
it's terrible. You know, I don't know that a country can come back if it has a fake press.
It's hard.
Because they're like the policemen. You know, they're like, they keep people honest, right? But Democrats don't have to be honest. They really don't have to be honest because they're not going to. They will never be accused of anything. It's interesting. I was so amazed that Harvey Weinstein got schlonged. He got hit as hard as you can get hit because he was sort of the king of the woke, right? Yeah. And yet he got hit. And I figured that maybe he wouldn't get hit so hard. But boy, did he get. You don't know him well. I don't know him well.
Yes, Harvey Weinstein, well-known king of the woke. But don't worry, Donald Trump, he says he is just fine.
I am the most stable human being. Remember they said a stable genius. I am the most stable human being. I've been doing this for a long time.
And all that is where we start today. MSNBC political analyst Mara Gay joins us. She's editorial board member with the New York Times. Plus, Reverend Al Sharpton is here. He is the host of MSNBC's Politics Nation and president of the National Action Network. And this weekend, he's going to be interviewing Vice President Kamala Harris in Atlanta. We're going to talk more about that forthcoming interview a little later on. Also with us, MSNBC columnist and contributor Charlie Sykes and NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. All right, Vaughn, 19 days to Election Day. Trump is on TV saying Abraham Lincoln should have cut a deal to avoid the Civil War. He goes on a podcast to talk about how prosecutors threw the book at Harvey Weinstein. Just, did I get all that right? Is that where we are?
I think that that's pretty accurate. There's not exactly a campaign focus, largely because the candidate himself doesn't stay focused on one specific message. And, you know, his reference to somehow Abraham Lincoln should have settled before the Civil War started between the Union and the Confederacy, of course, what exactly would a settlement look like? Would that include slavery? The best effort was the Crittenden Compromise, which would have added a constitutional amendment that would have allowed the South to maintain slavery. And so Donald Trump, though, you know, also in the Fox and Friends appearance, he was talking about that Kamala Harris would supposedly ban cows and get rid of cows, which is just a misrepresentation of the Green New Deal. But this is where you see the Republican nominee just over 2 weeks out, despite sometimes the best efforts of his campaign to build events focused around immigration or the economy, their candidate has a much different tenor. And just to underscore, the media interviews that he decides to do are are podcasts that are very friendly towards him, but also the likes of Fox and Friends, which we should note, that type of interview that played out this morning was a stark contrast to the one that the Vice President Harris did with Bret Baier just 48 hours ago.
So, Maura, I want to correct myself. I said 19 days. It is 18 days. We all have the right to misspeak. There's the misspeaking, and then there is the exhaustion. If you're too exhausted to talk to the shade room, are you potentially too exhausted to be president of the United States?
Ooh, well, right. I mean, what Vaughn is identifying here is it's not just an issue for the campaign that Donald Trump is veering off script. I think a central issue that he has in making this closing argument is he isn't going to win with just his base. And much of the appeal of Trumpism that I hear when I talk to voters, that we see in polls, is this, and I think it's a false idea, but this idea that he's strong, that he projects strength and leadership, and this idea that he's an outsider and that a vote for him is a rational choice for Americans who somehow feel disaffected by the political system. Now, I don't believe that Donald Trump actually has solutions for those Americans, but that is a large part of the appeal that you hear when you talk to voters at rallies and on the trail. The problem is that the reality of Donald Trump himself and who he is, of course, just none of those things. He's a threat to democracy. He has nothing to offer the American people other than more, grift for his own benefit in the next 4 years. And I think the more we hear from Donald Trump himself on the trail, the more obvious that becomes to voters. It's harder to really take seriously this notion that he would be a strong leader or that he somehow cares about Americans who feel like the political system hasn't served them when you actually listen to what he's saying. So he is really his own worst enemy on the campaign trail, which is not the closing argument that you need in a close race 18 days out from Election Day.
Charlie, I think that Maura, as she so often does, gets it exactly right, that when you talk to voters on the trail, you hear about this outsider status, which takes a certain chutzpah to have been president of the United States for 4 years and still consider yourself and position yourself as an outsider, and yet somehow he has succeeded in doing that. And to this question about strength, I think it is part of why you see Vice President Harris going after him on that exact element, and also on this question of exhaustion. Listen to what she had to say today about this reporting that Trump is exhausted.
I've been hearing reports that his team at least is saying he's suffering from exhaustion. And that's apparently the excuse for why he's not doing interviews. And of course, he's not doing the CNN town hall. He refuses to do another debate. And, look, being president of the United States is probably one of the hardest jobs in the world. And so we really do need to ask if he's exhausted being on the campaign trail. Is he fit to do the job? And I think that's a question that is an open-ended question that he needs to answer.
Charlie, who do you think that appeals to?
Well, it appeals to voters who I think are the very small segment of the electorate that hasn't made up its mind, but also, to many of these soft Republicans who might like some of the things that he's done in the past, but are now having doubts about all of this. Because, look, in a less insane political moment, candidates would try to put forth their best self, their most attractive side. I remember back in 2016, there's at least the urban legend that Donald Trump sort of moderated his approach in the weeks before that election. But what are we seeing right now? This is the most bizarre, crazy, low energy, but also dangerous closing argument we've ever seen. Completely undisciplined. This is what Donald Trump is presenting to voters 18 days before the election. And I think we need to keep two thoughts in our heads at the same time. Number one, we are seeing a completely incoherent, a guy who is clearly in some decline, deeply unserious man, but also someone who is quite dangerous. At the same time that he can't put together a coherent thought, his campaign continues to push an agenda that I'm not sure that every American has fully taken on board. The idea of the mass deportations, the use of the military. So at one point you look at him and go, he's weak, he's old, he's decompensating in real time. but he's also genuinely dangerous because, as I've said before on this program, you know, a clown with a flamethrower still has a flamethrower. And I think that we need to keep that in mind as well.
Well, Rev, I want you to take a listen to something President Bill Clinton had to say. This is in North Carolina yesterday. He was on the trail with Tim Walz. Take a listen.
I don't know how many more elections I'll be involved with, and I'm too old to gild the lily. Heck, I'm only 2 months younger than Donald Trump. But good news for you is I will not spend 30 minutes swaying back and forth to you. I've played enough music. I will not clap off beat. Nor will I pretend to be a conductor. Because we got a race to win. And we have to win it.
Rev, President Clinton could be up there saying, hey, are my guys listening to me? Let's roll my favorite song, Don't Stop by Fleetwood Mac. Everyone will love it and enjoy it. Age alone, he said he's only 2 months younger than Donald Trump. That's not a rationale for the behavior that we are seeing. And to Charlie's point, yes, he may be exhausted. Some of this may have to do with age, but the message undergirding all of it is still as dangerous.
The message is still as dangerous and more because he has gotten more unhinged in terms of what he's advocating, what he's proposing this time than even when we first saw him run in 2016. What he is saying, what Project 2025 is documenting, which is really the policies of Donald Trump, is far more dangerous. And I think that what people should ask themselves is just 4 or 5 months ago, when none of that kind of behavior was publicly demonstrated by Joe Biden, many people said he needs to get out the race. You need to ask yourself honestly, why are you not saying that about Donald Trump, who has behaved in a way that Joe Biden never behaved and is an embarrassment to his party and his family? It seems that there's such understanding for Donald Trump that we didn't give to a far more able and far more competent Joe Biden in the same 3 or 4 month period. So what is really motivating you to support Trump? Is it his misogyny? Is it his racism? I mean, what's the real reason? Because it couldn't be age incoherence when you have a man standing up on the stage, paying everybody from Pavarotti to rock and rollers, and he can't even dance. He just kind of weaves along. And that's your idea of a president?
He can't even dance is perhaps the sickest burn you have ever offered on this program, Reverend Sharpton. Vaughn, you said something that I want to make sure we go back to, which is this idea that Republicans do have a message. They simply have someone top of the ticket who is not interested in staying disciplined and consistent on that message. I thought this reporting was interesting. Quote, Anna Kelly, a spokeswoman for the Republican National Committee, which is supporting the Trump campaign, said Mr. Trump's message is clear and consistent. President Trump's agenda for America's working men and women will fix our broken economy to lower costs and secure the border to make our community safe. I read that, Vaughn, and I say, okay, that is what they have tested in focus groups. That's what they have tested in polling. If we stay really focused on this messaging on border and the economy,